What happens when a self-made CEO takes a job answering phones at his own restaurant and hears a hostess mock a struggling family. Mason Vellaro had built his restaurant chain from nothing but a food truck and a dream. 10 years, 5 locations, and hundreds of employees later, he was rarely recognized except at the original spot. That anonymity came in handy when he decided to go undercover. Lately, online reviews for the 5th and newest location built in a booming suburb outside of Phoenix had shifted. Not awful but off, cold service, long waits, a few complaints about unwelcoming hosts. Mason didn't want to rely on reports anymore. He wanted to feel it for himself. He shaved his beard, dyed his graying hair darker, and wore thick-rimmed glasses that made him look like a different man. He used his middle name Anthony and signed up to work the phones and front counter as a new trainee for reservations and check-ins. The restaurant's district manager, a guy named Franco, had never actually met him in person. Everything had been through emails or calls. And the store manager, Natalie, was new hired 2 months ago after the previous one quit. Mason had never met her either. By Monday, Mason was standing behind the front desk, a polo shirt on, clipboard in hand, watching the lunch rush roll in. Natalie, mid-30s, sharp voice, was counting receipts in the office when he arrived. "You're the trainee, Anthony, right?" "Yes, ma'am. You shadow Kelsey today, learn the system, don't mess up the seating chart, that's all I ask." Kelsey was the hostess. Early 20s, long blonde hair, heavy eye makeup, and a 1,000-yard stare whenever she wasn't talking to customers. "Hey," she said without looking up from the screen, "just take calls, don't touch the reservation book." "Got it," Mason said, keeping his tone light. By noon, Mason had answered over 30 calls and was starting to notice something odd. Kelsey would roll her eyes whenever families called asking about high chairs or boosters. Anytime someone mentioned allergies or special accommodations, she'd mutter under her breath. "People are so needy," she whispered once, shaking her head. "If they can't handle a restaurant, just stay home." Mason didn't say anything yet. He wanted to watch. At 2 o'clock, a family of 4 walked in. A dad in work clothes, a mom holding a toddler, and a boy who looked around 10. The mom looked unsure, like maybe this was a splurge. The dad smiled, trying to play it cool. "Hi," he said. "We called ahead for a table for 4. Kelsey looked them over. "Name, Rodriguez." Kelsey didn't check the screen. Instead, she leaned toward Mason and said quietly, "Didn't hear anything about a Rodriguez, probably didn't even call." Mason raised an eyebrow. He knew they had. He took the call himself. "Actually, Anthony," Kelsey cut in quickly, "I got it." Then louder to the family, "We're full for now, you can wait maybe 40 minutes. The mom looked confused. "But we called ahead." "Yeah, that doesn't guarantee anything," Kelsey said, her voice flat. "Sorry," the dad sighed, clearly trying not to cause a scene. "Okay, we'll wait." The family stepped to the side, Mason's jaw tightened. Then, as soon as they were out of earshot, Kelsey turned to another hostess and said, "If you're gonna bring your whole broke family in here, at least dress like you belong." Mason froze. "What you just say?" he asked. Kelsey blinked. "What? Nothing," the other hostess muttered, eyes wide. "Did you just say something about them dressing like they belong?" Mason asked again, louder this time. Kelsey scoffed. "It's a joke, chill out." "No," Mason said, stepping closer. "That wasn't a joke, that was cruel." Kelsey looked annoyed now. "Why are you even here?" "You're a trainee." Mason's stomach turned, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm here to do more than answer phones." He turned to the family. "Excuse me, sir," he called out. "I'm sorry there was a mix-up. Your table is ready." The dad looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes." "Right this way." He grabbed 2 menus and led them to a booth himself. The little boy smiled at him. "Thanks, mister." "No problem, buddy." Back at the host stand, Kelsey was still glaring. Natalie had returned and was watching from the side. Mason walked up to her. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Natalie raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" He took a breath. He wasn't ready to reveal himself yet, not until he saw more. "Let's just say," Mason muttered, "I'm going to be sticking around a little longer than planned." By Thursday, Mason had blended in enough that nobody questioned his presence. He took calls, confirmed reservations, and quietly observed the flow of the restaurant from behind the front counter. The early week shift had revealed more than enough to keep him on alert. But what concerned him most wasn't just Kelsey's behavior, it was how normal it seemed to everyone else. Natalie, the manager, ran things with a clipboard in hand and a constant sense of urgency. She didn't micromanage, but she didn't seem to notice much either. Mason had watched her walk past 2 separate guest complaints without acknowledging either. One couple had waited almost 30 minutes past their reservation time. Another had gotten the wrong dish and was met with silence when they asked for a correction. Mason waited. He wanted to see if it was just an off day. But by the time Friday rolled around, the pattern was unavoidable. That morning, he arrived 2 hours early and sat at the bar with a black coffee, watching prep unfold. The kitchen was already active. He hadn't had a chance to step back there, yet he wanted to keep that for the weekend when things got busiest. For now, he was focused on the front. At 10:30, Natalie walked in, phone pressed to her ear. She stopped at the host stand, glanced at Mason, and motioned for him to follow her into the office. "Anthony, close the door." He did. She lowered her voice. "Quick thing, you've been here a few days. I know you're just helping out temporarily, but don't get too involved in staff drama, okay?" He kept his expression neutral. "What kind of drama? Just, I heard you raised your voice at Kelsey the other day. I get it. She's blunt. But she's also fast and keeps the line moving." Mason folded his arms. "Did you ask what she said?" Natalie looked annoyed. "That's not the point. I just need the hosts to stay focused. No distractions." He let that sit for a second, then nodded. "Understood." He left the office and walked straight to the back, past the kitchen door and into the alley behind the building. He pulled out his phone and called his executive assistant, Rachel, who was based out of HQ. "Rachel, I need the security footage from the front host stand. Tuesday from 1:30 to 3, and any guest complaints logged this week at this location." She didn't question it. "I'll have it within the hour." He hung up and went back inside. By noon, the lobby was packed. Mason worked the phone while Kelsey handled the walk-ins. Another hostess, Maya, a soft-spoken college student, helped seat tables. Mason had noticed she did most of the actual escorting to tables while Kelsey stayed behind the stand. A woman in her 60s came in with her granddaughter, maybe 7 years old, holding a small purse tightly to her chest. "We have a reservation, under Fields," the woman said. Kelsey glanced at the screen. "You're 10 minutes early. We can wait," the woman said, smiling. "She's just excited. It's her birthday." Kelsey looked at the girl, then at the older woman's shoes, scuffed sandals, probably worn too many summers. "You can wait outside," she said flatly. "There's no room here." Mason stepped in immediately. "We actually just had a booth open up." "I'll take you right over." The woman blinked, surprised. "Oh, thank you, no problem," Mason said, grabbing 2 menus. "Come with me." He walked them to a booth near the window, poured waters himself, and made sure the little girl got a kid's menu and crayons. Back at the host stand, Maya pulled him aside. "She does that a lot," she whispered. "Turns people away who don't look, I don't know, fancy enough." Mason kept his voice low. "You've seen that more than once," Maya nodded. "Last weekend, she told a guy in a work uniform we were booked when we weren't. But I don't want to get in trouble." "You won't," he said, then walked to the office without another word. Natalie was at her desk, typing. "We need to talk, now." She looked up. "Something wrong again?" "I just watched Kelsey turn away a child on her birthday because her grandma looked poor. That's not blunt, that's unacceptable," Natalie sighed. "She's not the warmest, but she keeps the line moving. You don't know how short-staffed we are." Mason leaned forward. "I don't care how fast someone is if they treat people like that. You're responsible for how your team behaves. If you can't see that, you're in the wrong role." She stood up. "Who do you think you are, talking to me that way? You're here for a few shifts and suddenly you're evaluating my leadership." Mason didn't blink. "Yes." Before she could respond, he pulled out his wallet, removed a thin leather card holder and handed her a business card. She stared at it, then looked up at him. Her face went pale. "You're Mason Vellaro, owner," she backed up slightly. I didn't know that's the problem. You should treat every person who walks in here like they have my last name, not because I'm the boss, because they're paying to be here. And your staff, most of them are trying. But they've been left to figure it out alone, and some of them are doing real damage." He walked out without waiting for her to respond. At the host stand, he looked at Maya. "Where's Kelsey?" Break, when she's back, sent her to the office. Kelsey returned 10 minutes later, chewing gum and scrolling on her phone. Maya relayed the message. Kelsey rolled her eyes and walked off. Mason waited. 8 minutes later, Natalie walked out of the office. Her face was unreadable. Kelsey followed, arms crossed. She spotted Mason at the front. He didn't wait. "I've seen enough," he said calmly. "You're done here," she blinked. "What? You've repeatedly disrespected guests. You've made discriminatory comments. You've failed to do even the basics of hospitality. This isn't a warning, it's a termination." She looked at Natalie. "You're letting him fire me." Natalie didn't speak. "You can collect your last check next week through HR," Mason said. "You can go now." Kelsey stared at him for a beat longer, then scoffed and walked out without another word. Mason turned to Maya. "Go grab some water. Take 5 minutes," she hesitated. "Really? Really?" She nodded and stepped away. Mason picked up the headset and answered the next call. "Thank you for calling Vellaro's," he said. "How can I help you today?" He kept his tone even, but his chest burned. Not with anger, but with determination. There was more to fix. Much more. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of quiet tension Mason hadn't felt since his early days on the food truck before the acclaim, before the investors, before the expansion. He sat in his car outside the restaurant 30 minutes before opening, watching the staff trickle in. No one knew he'd be working the floor again. He hadn't told anyone he was returning today. But after what he'd witnessed this past week, he wasn't ready to disappear behind spreadsheets again. He stepped inside just as deliveries were being signed for. A line cook pushed a cart of produce toward the back, and a dishwasher moved quickly through the kitchen door, earbuds in. Mason caught the scent of onions being chopped. Real prep work was already underway. At the host stand, Maya was setting up menus, her hair pulled into a loose bun. She glanced up. "You're back?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. "For the weekend," Mason said. "You holding up all right?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It's been calmer, but I think people are still waiting to see what's next." Mason scanned the lobby. "Where's Natalie?" "In the office." "She's been in since 8. Didn't say much yesterday after everything." He thanked Maya and made his way to the back office. Natalie was at her desk, staring at a spreadsheet. She looked up, surprised. "I didn't expect you in today." "I'm not here to observe anymore," Mason said, shutting the door behind him. "I'm here to fix this." She stood slowly. "I've been going through schedules, trying to figure out staffing gaps. We're running too lean on weekends." "Then let's adjust," Mason said. "But before we do that, I need to know what you actually see when you walk this floor. Because from what I've seen, there's a leadership vacuum, and I'm not just talking about Kelsey. I'm talking about what you allowed to become normal." Natalie sat down again, her confidence from earlier in the week noticeably dimmed. "I'm not going to make excuses," she said. "I got overwhelmed trying to keep up with targets. The last manager left a mess, and I didn't feel like I had the support." Mason nodded. "Then let's see what happens when you get it. I'm staying on site through Sunday. I'll be rotating through every position, and you'll be by my side for half of it. If you want a future here, I need to know you can rebuild trust with staff and with guests." She looked up at him, more determined now. "All right, I'm in." Lunch rush approached quickly. Mason took a back server apron and started running dishes alongside a server named Olivia. She was in her 30s, moved with purpose, and knew half the customers by name. "Anthony," she said, balancing a tray of pasta and flatbreads. "Haven't seen you on the floor before." "Helping out this weekend," Mason said. "Trying to get a feel for the flow." "Then follow close," she said, nodding toward the dining room. "No room for slow feet." They moved table to table, and Mason quickly realized Olivia was carrying more than just plates. She was covering 2 zones by herself. Every time she passed another server, she gave quick instructions: refill at 12. Kid at 4 needs a straw. Check dessert at 10. "You managing this section alone?" Mason asked as they stepped into the kitchen to grab more drinks. "Since last week," she said. "We had 2 people quit. One's training in Scottsdale, the other just ghosted." "Why hasn't anyone been brought in to help?" "No one's lasted more than 3 days," Olivia said. "They either can't handle the pace or don't like the vibe." Mason didn't respond immediately. He filled 2 glasses of iced tea and followed her back out. Once the orders were down, he circled back to the bar where Natalie was checking inventory sheets. "We need to talk about Olivia," he said. "She's one of our strongest servers," Natalie said without looking up. "She's also covering 2 full zones and coordinating half the floor. You realize that's not sustainable, right?" Natalie looked up now. "I know. I've been trying to find someone with her pace, but you won't," Mason said. "Not unless you build a system around her, not on top of her. Get her a shadow this afternoon, someone she can train. And we're pulling her hourly report. I want to see how long she's been carrying this load." Natalie nodded, already reaching for her tablet. Just then, a loud voice rose from the side hallway near the restrooms. "I don't care what your shift says. If I need you now, you work now. That's how this goes." Mason turned. A prep cook in a navy apron stood stiffly near the hallway, while a shorter man in a branded polo barked at him. Mason recognized the man, Lewis, the assistant manager. The only supervisor who hadn't interacted with him all week. Mason stepped in. "Is there a problem?" Lewis turned to him without recognition. "This doesn't concern you. It does now." Lewis narrowed his eyes. "And you are," Mason stepped forward, voice calm. "I'm the owner. And I just watched you corner an employee over a scheduling issue loud enough for customers to hear it." Lewis's posture shifted instantly. He didn't follow the prep list. I've been trying to get him to." Mason cut him off. "Then you document it. You don't shout it. You don't threaten people behind the host stand. If you can't manage without intimidation, you don't belong in leadership." Lewis opened his mouth, but Mason raised a hand. "I've seen enough. Leave your badge with Natalie. We'll arrange your exit with HR." Lewis stood frozen for a second, then turned and walked toward the back. The prep cook, who couldn't have been more than 19, looked down at the ground. His hands trembled slightly. Mason turned to him. "What's your name?" "Javier. You did nothing wrong. If someone talks to you like that again, you come directly to the GM or to me." Javier nodded, eyes wide. Mason walked back to the front where Maya was checking in a party of 6. She looked more relaxed now, even smiled briefly when he passed. He stepped outside to breathe. The sun was high, casting strong shadows across the sidewalk. A family walked past with takeout bags, laughing mid-conversation. Mason watched them go, then pulled out his phone. "Rachel," he said after she answered, "start drafting a regional training plan. I want every manager retrained on conflict resolution, scheduling strategy, and guest experience standards. And I want a direct line set up for anonymous employee feedback." She didn't ask questions, just said, "Got it." He hung up and went back inside. By dinner, the shift had settled. Olivia had a trainee shadowing her named Marcus, a quiet guy who asked good questions and moved quickly. Natalie was on the floor greeting tables, something Mason hadn't seen her do once all week. Maya took over the seating chart with more confidence now that the tension had lifted. Even Javier had relaxed, humming under his breath while prepping citrus behind the bar. Mason stood at the back of the dining room, arms crossed, watching it all. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was moving, and this time he wasn't watching from a distance. Sunday morning broke with a gray sky and the first sign of summer rain dusting the pavement outside the restaurant. The kind of quiet drizzle that softened the air but didn't disrupt traffic. Mason stood inside the storage room, clipboard in hand, reviewing inventory alongside Natalie. She looked more present today, focused, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, and a pen tucked behind her ear. "We're short on lemons and napkins," she said, flipping the page. Mason nodded. "Orders already in. Should arrive before the dinner shift." She paused, checking the time. "You've been here before me every day this week. I needed to see what it takes to keep this place breathing," he said. "Now I need to make sure it keeps breathing without me." He closed the clipboard and handed it back. "How are we on staffing?" 2 servers, 1 barback, Meyer on host, and Olivia's still training Marcus. "I've got 1 call out from a dishwasher, but Javier said he'd cover the extra hour." Mason didn't respond right away. He looked through the half-open door toward the prep line, where Javier was tying a fresh apron. He was quiet but steady, the kind of employee who didn't say much but did more than expected. "I want to talk to him before shift starts." Natalie nodded. "He's probably finishing up the morning prep." Mason stepped into the kitchen. The line was already warming up, burners hissing, pans clattering, the smell of garlic and butter thick in the air. Javier stood near the back, slicing limes with practiced rhythm. "Got a minute?" Mason asked. Javier wiped his hands and nodded. "Sure." Mason leaned against the counter. "I saw you offered to stay late again." "I don't mind," Javier said. "It's just a couple extra hours." "I appreciate the attitude," Mason said, "but I want to make sure you're not burning out." "You've been taking on a lot," Javier hesitated. "I like it here, now that it feels different." "How so?" Javier looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Before, it felt like we were just bodies, like no one really cared what was happening. Even when I got yelled at the other day, I thought, that's just how it is, but when you stepped in, it felt like someone saw it, actually saw it." Mason nodded slowly. "You should never have to normalize that kind of treatment. That's not what this place is supposed to be." Javier gave a quiet nod and returned to his cutting board. Mason walked out, more certain than ever that lasting change had to start with who felt safe enough to stay. By midday, the restaurant had filled with families, couples, and a few regulars Mason remembered from older locations. Maya kept the front moving with a new sense of control, not rushed, not frazzled. She had found a rhythm, checking names, adjusting wait times calmly, and even taking a brief moment to chat with kids waiting near the counter. Inside, Olivia ran her section like a conductor guiding a symphony. Marcus stayed close behind, taking notes mentally and physically, glancing at her every move before replicating it. She corrected him gently when he misjudged an order's timing, but never made him feel small. Near the bar, Mason noticed a man in a navy suit gesturing sharply at the bartender. The man's voice was low, but his tone was clipped impatient. Natalie approached. "I've got it," Mason said. He stepped toward the guest, catching only the last part of the exchange. "I don't care who you have back there. If I ask for it a certain way, that's how it should come." The bartender, a young woman named Lanny, looked tense but professional. "Something wrong?" Mason asked evenly. The suited man turned. "I ordered a Manhattan. It tastes like someone used a measuring cup instead of instinct." Lanny kept her hands steady on the bar towel. "I used house specs, sir. We follow a standard." Mason looked at the drink, then at Lanny. "You poured it exactly how I taught you," she nodded once. 2 ounces rye, 1 sweet vermouth, 2 dashes bitters, stirred, orange peel garnish. Mason turned back to the man. "That's the correct recipe. If you'd prefer a different version, we can remake it, but we don't serve off instinct, we serve off consistency." The man scoffed. "Whatever. Just bring me a beer." Mason stepped behind the bar, poured it himself, and set it down with a small coaster. "On the house," he said. "And for reference, our team is trained to serve with precision. If that's not to your taste, there are other places that pour by feel." The man didn't respond. Mason walked away without waiting for a reply. Later that evening, Mason gathered everyone in the dining room after close. Chairs were up on tables, floor mopped. The scent of lemon cleaner hung in the air. He stood near the front, arms relaxed at his sides. "I want to thank all of you," he began. "Not just for this weekend, but for showing me what this place really is." Maya stood near the host stand, hands clasped in front of her. Olivia leaned against the server station, Marcus beside her, scribbling the last of his notes. Javier stood near the kitchen doorway, still in uniform. "There are things I missed," Mason continued, "and that's on me. I let distance create gaps. I trusted systems more than people, and I forgot that good service doesn't just come from training, it comes from trust and respect and recognizing effort." He looked at Olivia. "You've carried more than your share. Starting next week, you're being promoted to floor lead. Your pay will reflect the responsibility, and Marcus, your training continues under her guidance. If you keep the pace, we'll talk about a permanent spot." Marcus straightened slightly, not quite smiling, but close. Mason turned to Maya. "You've shown more grace under pressure than most I've seen in bigger roles. Effective tomorrow, you'll be rotating into a shift supervisor track. Natalie will guide you." He turned to Javier last. "I'm setting up a scholarship fund for part-time employees pursuing school. You're the first name on the list." Javier blinked, then nodded once, quietly stunned. Natalie stepped forward. "I have something to add," she said. Mason stepped aside. "I didn't lead the way I should have," she said. I didn't listen enough. That changes now. If you have concerns, ideas, or just need to vent, my door stays open, permanently. The room stayed silent for a moment, then Olivia clapped once, Marcus followed, then Maya, then the rest. Mason waited until the room quieted again. This restaurant exists because people believed in it when it was just a truck and a sandwich board, he said. But it grows because of people like you who show up, who care, who try. I won't forget that again. He stepped down from the low ledge and walked toward the kitchen. Behind him, the team lingered, talking softly, not rushing out. He passed by the prep line one last time, lights dimmed, stainless steel counters scrubbed clean. He stopped at the door, turned back for a second and looked over the floor. No shouting, no tension, just quiet. It wasn't fixed, not completely, not yet, but it was healing. And this time he'd stay close enough to see it through.